everyone, Mrs. Caslon here. Today we are rounding numbers, but today we're going to learn how to do it without a number line. We have been rounding on a number line, and today we're going to get to look at another way to round numbers. So this little poem is going to come in real handy today. It says, find your number, look next door, 4 or less, let it rest, 5 or more, raise the score. So we're going to be looking at that quite a bit, and I also put that on your paper that you'll be doing today. That way you can remember this. We're going to start off with rounding to the nearest 10. So I've got 3 numbers here. The first one is 42. Now the directions are very important, because if we're rounding to the nearest 10, then that means we need to underline the tens place, because that's what the directions say. We circle the number to the right. Okay, and then we're going to look at this number and decide if this will stay the same or get to go up. So look at this 2, and remember our poem, 4 or less, let it rest, 5 or more, raise the score. This is 4 or less, so we're going to let it rest, let the 4 rest, which means it gets to stay as a 4, and then this just turns into a 0. What I say sometimes is this number disappears and all that's left is the magic ring of fairy dust. So 42 rounded to the nearest 10 is 40. Okay, let's try 65. We're still rounding to the nearest 10, so I want to underline my tens place, circle the number to the right. This number is 5 or more, so we raise the score. That means this gets to go up by 1. So 6 turns into a 7. This number disappears, and all that's left is the magic ring of fairy dust. So 65 would round to 70. Let's look at this number. This time we have a 3-digit number, but we can still round to the nearest 10. We're still going to find the tens place, and we're still going to circle the number to the right. Okay, is 9 4 or less, or is it 5 or more? 9 is 5 or more, so we're going to raise the score. So what's 1 more than 8? If we raise the score, that turns into a 9. This little guy stays. Technically this is 18 tens, so now we just have 1 more, which is 19 tens. We can't forget about that number. And then this number disappears. So 190. Now something you want to make sure, if you're rounding to the nearest 10, then it should end in 10. So notice this ends in 10, this ends in 10, and this does too. Think about the number 10. Number 10 has 10 in it. That's why if we're rounding to the nearest 10, we're rounding to a number that we can count by tens. 10, 20, 30, 40. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. If we kept going, eventually we would get to 190. Okay, let's look at rounding to the nearest 100. Okay, so round to the nearest 100. That means we underline the hundreds place because the directions say nearest 100. We circle the number to the right. 4 or less, let it rest, 5 or more, raise the score. This is 5 or more, so we raise the score. So 3 gets to go up to a 4. This number disappears, and this number disappears. Because remember, we're rounding to the nearest 100, we should be getting a number that we can count by hundreds. 100, 200, 300, 400. So let's say you forgot that 0 and you just had 40. Is 40 reasonable? Is 40 something close to 378? Not quite. Remember, when we're rounding, we're just finding a number that's close to this number. And 40 is not close. 400 sounds better. Okay, this time I have a 4-digit number, and I'm going to round to the nearest 100. So I still underline my hundreds place. and I still circle the number to the right. Notice I have these extra numbers. We'll worry about them in just a minute. So I circled a 0. 4 or less, let it rest. 5 or more, raise the score. 0 is 4 or less, so we're going to let it rest. Now remember, this guy, this friend over here of 6 stays the same because technically this number is 16. We need to keep it as 16. 0 disappears, or I guess actually it stays as a 0, but this number over here also turns into a 0. Now remember, if we're rounding to the nearest hundred, here's the number 100, there's the word hundred. How many zeros? 1, 2. So this has 2 zeros, and this has 2 zeros. So both of these are numbers that if I were going to count by hundreds, then I would eventually get to both of those numbers. And they're close to the original number. So those both make sense. Okay, let's look at rounding to the nearest thousand. You can keep going and going and going all the way to infinity rounding. We're just going to go to 10,000. For the most part, you'll be using the nearest hundred the most and the nearest 10. But sometimes you will need to round to the nearest thousand. Okay, so it says round to the nearest 1,000. That's important because I need to know what to underline. I underline the thousands place. Ones, tens, hundreds, comma, thousands. That's my thousands place. It's always the place right before the comma. Circle the number to the right. 5 or more, raise the score. So I'm going to raise the score because 8 is 5 or more. So raise the score. What's 1 more than 5? 6. Keep your comma there. And then the 8 and all of his friends on the side all turn to zeros. 1, 2, 3 zeros. Remember, we always have 3 numbers after a comma. Okay, now let's move on to this number. It's a little bit bigger. I'm still rounding to the nearest thousand. Remember how I said the number right before the comma is always the thousand spot. So that's going to be underlined, and I circle the number to the right. 4 or less, let it rest. This is 4 or less, so I'm going to let it rest. 3 stays as a 3. Now remember, this is technically 23 right here, so we get to keep the 2. Now what happens to this number and its friends? They're going to turn into zeros, they're going to disappear, and all that's left is their magic ring of fairy dust. So this number rounds to 23,000. Remember, you always want to double check and make sure that your rounded number really is close to this. 23,000 really is close to 23,177. 6,000 is close to 5,809. When I look at the number 1,000, that's written like this. How many zeros? 1, 2, 3. 3 zeros. Look how many zeros our rounded numbers end in. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So we should be able to, our rounded numbers, our answers should be numbers that if we were going to count by thousands, like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, we would eventually get to this. Eventually, take me a little bit longer, but I would eventually get to 23,000. Okay, one more. You won't have to do this very often, but I do want you to know how to do it. Round to the nearest 10,000. It's just like what we've been doing. You're just going to underline a different place. So this says 10,000. So the 10,000s place is what we're looking at. Ones, tens, hundreds, comma, thousands, 10,000s. That's what you underline. Circle the number to the right. Go through your little poem. 4 or less, let it rest. This is 4 or less. I'm going to let it rest. 5 gets to rest. 0, and everything else disappears. So this 0 disappears, the comma stays, 0, 0, 0. All right, let's do this one over here. I'm still rounding to the nearest 10,000, ones, tens, hundreds, comma, thousands, 10,000s. There's my 10,000 spot. I have an extra number here. I'll look at that in a minute. Circle the number to the right. Is this 4 or less, or is this 5 or more? This is 5 or more, so we raise the score. I get to raise that to a 9. What do we do with this number? Hit this friend of 8's gets to stay. Remember, 18, 1 more than 18 is just 19. Now the circled number disappears, and all of his friends disappear. Okay, let's look at the number 10,000. How many zeros? 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice our answers end in 4 zeros. Let me look at a common mistake. You know what? I'm actually just going to use this one. So I've seen people do this before. They do their rounding, and they say, okay, 4 or less, let it rest, and then they keep their 0, and guess what they forget to do? They forget to make all of these friends zeros too. Okay? So you should be able to tell really easily right off the bat if a number is rounded or not, because it should end in zeros. If you see that these are not zeros, then you should know right off the bat that that is not rounded. So let me give you a number. Has this been rounded or not? No, because it does not end in any zeros. So this has not been rounded. What about this number? Has this number been rounded? Yes, because it already ends in zeros. Now this number ends in 2 zeros, so it's rounded to the nearest 100. Okay, I hope that helps you on today's lesson, and I will be seeing you soon. Bye.